this fractured, heterogeneous command of NATO, it's all really under the auspices of the United States, right? Because they're the ones who command Eurocom. Is it Eurocom?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like they're the ones who would be overseeing the coordination of all this at the end of the day. So like you say, like Poland is using US weapons. So wouldn't the US be the ones who are like centralized the control of all of this stuff?
They could, but I don't think they will. I think what the U.S. is going to do is back the hell off real quick and become, quote, neutral and then feed the Europeans. Hey, Trump's already said it flat out. We're not going to fight the Russians directly, but we'll sell you the weapons so you can fight the Russians.
But if they're
That's where
providing
you make the money.
if they're providing the weapons and the ISR, and so aren't they really just fighting the Russians under another name? I mean, are the Russians going to dignify that? It's the same thing as saying, well, Israel, we have nothing to do with Israel. They're doing their own thing when really we're providing them all the weapons and everything they need to fight the Iranians. Like, isn't it a similar situation like that where are we going to continue to entertain and dignify this facade that the U.S. isn't at the helm of all of this?
Unfortunately, I mean, everybody knows it's a facade, but unfortunately, I think they would, and maybe even fortunately, because the alternative is if the U.S. and Russia start going at it directly, it's not a guarantee, but there's a very good chance that it could go nuclear. Look, the U.S. military is in such a state that it could take Russia on. Yeah, it could in the open seas, maybe, because the U.S. Navy is very overextended. But the problem is on the ground, you really can't do anything. Those aircraft carriers won't come in within 2,000 kilometers of Russia, and the problem too is, Russia has a Zircon, which is a hypersonic anti-ship missile, goes Mach 8. So you're talking about 2 kilometers per second. So, and by the way, it can carry a nuclear-tipped warhead, but you don't need a nuclear-tipped warhead for to take the aircraft carrier out. So let me just think about it. A Russian submarine pops up 200 kilometers away from an aircraft carrier. The chances of it being found are pretty much close to zero. I mean, that's a gigantic piece of sea to try to find at 200 kilometers. It launches its payload of Zircon hypersonic missiles. There's nothing that can stop them. The U.S. has nothing that can stop a hypersonic missile, except sheer luck, and one of them falls out of the air. 200 kilometers, they accelerate maybe 2-3 seconds to acceleration. They'll be on target in about 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
So why hasn't Russia then, with these hypersonic weapons, why haven't they taken out all the Patriot missile launchers and radars and stuff like that? Because if they are that undefeatable, can't they defeat all those systems?
They've destroyed a lot of them. The Ukrainians, well, first of all, let's begin with it's most of the Patriot systems that are being the people manning most of these Patriot systems are not Ukrainians. It takes quite a long time to train up a crew. One Patriot battery is 94 people, from the drivers and the mechanics to the operators and the officers. That's one battery of Patriots. It takes quite a long time to train them up. I mean, mechanics take up to 54 weeks of training. So this is not something that they've lost so much. It's obvious it's not just Ukrainians. There are Americans there. There are Brits. There are Canadians. There are Germans. There are Poles. They may be brought in as mercenaries, or they may be brought in as sheep-dipped mercenaries.
Yeah,
but they're getting killed. I mean, that just like the HIMARS are not run by Ukrainians; those are Americans. So every time a HIMARS goes kaboom, that crew of Americans just went with it. The first couple hits actually took out, and there was one right outside Kiev that took out an entire battery. But it was because these idiots set everything up real close. And you can see the hypersonic coming in, and they fire off 36 missiles. And they all go, yeah, it's interesting enough, by the way, out of those 36 missiles, about 5 of them just go in random directions. They defect and go find a house that they fall in love with. And the Patriot has a problem with that. They I call it the Raytheon roulette. Every 6th to 8th missile just goes somewhere, wherever it wants to go. So you've got that problem. The proper way to deploy these systems is you keep them far enough apart from each other because you've got cabling that runs between the systems. They don't have to be near each other.
Yeah.
They can be deployed 20, 30, 40 meters from each other. So even if you hit one, more likely what you're going to hit is you're going to hit the command post or maybe the radar unit. But that doesn't destroy the rest of the battery. That's a smart way to deploy it. So they're a little harder to destroy than that. Now, there's been several batteries that have been destroyed on the march, and that's because they got hit by Iskander missiles while they were marching, doing a road march. That's an easier way to destroy them because they're closer together. But even that, well, the Patriots are out anyways. And you know, if you watch the video from Professor Postal, I had the honor of having him on my show once. Yeah. He did. I mean, he's been on Raytheon's target list since the first Gulf War because he highlighted that the PAC-1 Patriots were pieces of crap that couldn't hit anything. Well, it hasn't gotten that much better. They're good at airplanes and they're good at helicopters, but they can't do jack or large, slow-moving drones. They can't do crap against ballistic missiles, and we've seen that. And he's done a study of it, and he came up with that they have a 5 to 6% intercept rate against PAC-3s against ballistic missiles. When you figure that an average PAC-3 costs $5 million, so 1 in 20 is hitting. So you're spending $100 million to take out maybe a $200,000 missile. That's how you bankrupt yourself really quickly.
Wouldn't I mean, if they could just take all these out, why not just wipe all the Patriots out with zircons and then send in the planes and start dropping the big bombs? Like, I don't understand if Russia has all of this surplus military capacity, why are they dragging this on so long? I mean, I've heard different theories as to why, because they're trying to get everything from they're trying to get experience to they're trying to build up their military industrial complex. What are your thoughts on why they're so seemingly reserved in fully committing all those forces you talk about to just getting this situation finished already?
I think this has been a combination. One, Russia's been keeping its own casualty rates pretty low. Drones upped them, but they were still, you got to figure that they were running between, in some areas, 10 to 1, 10 Ukrainians for every Russian, and some areas they dropped down about 4 to 1. But that's what happens when you have air dominance, you have artillery dominance, and now you have, depending where you're at, you have drone dominance. Particularly if you have these, what's the word for it? It happens when sometimes you can remember Russian, you can't remember the English, or vice versa. Yeah. Loitering munitions. You get the loitering munitions, which Russia came out with early on. And by the way, the Iranians now have loitering anti-aircraft munitions that they use to take out the F-35s. So you've got, that's part of it. Part of it is, in my opinion, is an economic war with the Europeans. Because we've seen where the European economies are going. Part of it is a rebuilding internally of Russia. The liberals ran away. A lot of the liberals ran away. They were supposed to cause the revolution. Internally, Russia's been changing a lot over the last 3 years, 4 years. War tends to do that. If the conflict went over relatively fast, a lot of these changes wouldn't have been able to take root effectively. So I think there's a whole combination of things in play here. Plus, attrition warfare. You know, you're not looking for big gains in land. You're looking for big casualty rates on the enemy. And the Ukrainians are losing on average between 1,000 to 2,000 men killed every single day.
Every day?
That's per day. Up and down that 1,000-kilometer front per day. And in the rear too, because they do have hits in the rear. You know, if you look at
where do you get those numbers from? Like, where are we deriving that from?
Well, one, it's from official numbers that have been coming out from the Russian side since day one on casualty rates, and it's been going up. Two, you see it it's been confirmed by several NGOs that do satellite tracking imagery of the growth of cemeteries. If you look at some of these cemeteries, like this, there's a cemetery southeast of Kharkov that's at least on 40, 50,000 people. I mean, it's a military cemetery. It's brand new, all the flags and everything else. And these cemeteries are everywhere. the amount of men and personnel. The Ukrainians, first, there's also the corpse exchange, and I've been to one of these interviews there. The 1,000 to 23 or 40 Russian corpses. Part of it is because, of course, Russia's advancing,
Right.
so they're picking up their own dead. But the majority of that is when they do 1,000, there's over 100,000 corpses or parts of corpses laying around in the morgues. And there's at least 300,000 bodies laying around that have been eaten by pigs, by rats, by crows, by feral dogs, and there's active teams picking it up. I've had a friend of mine. After he got injured, he was transferred to an evacuation unit. What battlefield evacuation means is they're the guys that come in there and pick up the bodies. So they were coming in Kupiansk, south of Kupiansk, where it was a stationary battlefield. Then Russia started moving forward, and they swept the Ukrainians out. And from what he's saying, he's expecting. I mean, he saw a couple of his buddies that were bodies are laying there. So I mean, that was quite personal. But from what he was saying, he's expecting to see a lot of Russian corpses. There weren't. They were picking up 10 Ukrainians for every single Russian, and these guys have just been dumped. Partially is because Ukraine uses human body wave tactics. When they get these guys off the streets, they go into one of two categories: 35 and younger and healthy, 35 and older or younger and not healthy. The younger guys, they get picked up by the assault brigades, and they get training, they get fed, and they're used for trying to do these counterattacks. They come in as either they're doing an intensified counterattack or they're coming in as the third wave. And the first two waves are from these older guys that are good for one or all. They get the basic training. This is the end of the rifle that the bullet comes out of. Okay, you're good. Let's go. Right. And another friend of mine who was fighting in Kharkiv. So they were coming in. The Russian army came into Kharkiv. They took the high ground in North Kharkiv, dug in, and that pulled the Ukrainians to attack them. He said, in front of his fighting position, in front of his bunker, was, he said, a 2-kilometer field. Ukrainians would bring these guys in, drop them off, and they'd charge across that field. It's like, we never even fired at them. The artillery would rip them up halfway there. We never had to fire machine guns at them, because none of them would make it halfway there across the field. They'd be all ripped up. A squad or two would be ripped up. Half a day later, another 2 squads brought in to charge across that field, and another 2 squads. And like, all we did was sit there and watch them get ripped to pieces by artillery. And they do that constantly.
So you think that it's an attritional war, and that's the primary motivation. Can you talk a little bit about the economic ramifications of this with respect to energy? The argument has been made that Europe needs the war more than Russia because, of course, Russia now controls all the black soil in Europe. They control all the resource wealth. They have, countless trillions of dollars of energy reserves. Europe really has nothing but a bunch of debt and an aging population. So can you talk a little bit about the realities of high diesel prices, the effects of attacks on Russian oil refineries? I know we're pressed for time, but I really want to get a sense of the macroeconomics that are involved here with this attritional war. And I know you've articulated that very succinctly on your channel, and maybe you could do that for my audience here today. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, I will correct one thing. Russia is 42% of Europe. Russia is 42% of subcontinent. Russia's got all the black soil. Well, Ukraine still has. There's some Ukrainian black soil. There's actually a little bit of black soil in Germany. But that's because during World War II,
but don't they control
German trucks that were heading, they're bringing supplies in.
They control the parts of Ukraine that have the most black soil, right? Like the Donbass and the.
Right. Well, control. It's reiterated into Russia.
Yeah.
Because all that land is Russian. I mean, the Ukraine itself is an artificially created country by the Soviets. So a little piece of area of black soil in Germany is where the Germans were stealing the black soil during World War II. The trucks going back were being filled up with black soil. So they were literally stealing the dirt you're standing on. But there has been damage in refineries, but the majority of damage, when you see these refineries hit, what you're looking at for the most part is you're looking at the fuel storage facilities at the end of the refineries. Either they are holding raw oil or they're holding finished product. The reason for that is refineries, if you've ever been to a refinery, refineries are huge. They're up to 15 kilometers long. There's hundreds of kilometers of pipes and vessels, and they're all pressurized. They're all pressurized, controlled by valves, and the valves are computerized. So the moment pressure drops, the computer picks up, the sensor picks up the drop in pressure, it closes the valve. No big, beautiful pictures for the Western press of a big fire and all the smoke. So it's pointless hitting the refinery, and replacing pipe is pretty easy. By the way, replacing the storage facilities is also pretty easy. There's just a big tank with an internal lining that has a lot of fuel in it. Nobody puts those out. It's pointless trying to put them out. You just let them burn out. You close the pipes going in and out, and you just let them burn out. But it makes for the big picture. So a lot of these refineries, when they go down, they're only going down for 2-3 weeks, and then they get them back up and they're running again. There was one refinery near Nizhny Novgorod that's been down 4 or 5 times now. They keep coming back. Now, if you look at what Iran has done to these refineries, that's a whole different level, because they're throwing in ballistic missiles carrying 1-ton warheads, and a lot of them. So they keep hitting. These drones are coming in, most of them carrying about 100 kilos of explosives or less, because to get as far as they need to have a lot less explosive, a lot more fuel to get that far. Having said that, last summer, supposedly the same type of actions took Russian refining down 40%. And then Reuters came out and said, well, no, it's actually 3%. So yeah, all your efforts were 3, and Russia said it was 1.5. So maybe somewhere in the middle, 2%. This year, there's been several slightly different cases, because one, they've been going after trucks, civilian trucks, military trucks, civilian trucks that may be carrying fuel. So they're going from a logistics point of view. 2, there's been hoarding, because there was some amount of panic in the population. And 3, they hit it during summer peak driving period. Russia does not produce enough gasoline to cover the peak driving period. It always imports almost every year. It does produce vast amounts of diesel. And without that diesel, by the way, Europe is screwed at this point. So Russia made up all of this, by the way, by going to India and saying, okay, the refined products you have from our oil, we're taking them, we're buying them. You either sell to us or you don't get any more oil. Of course, India sold it to Russia. And the Europeans were all laughing about it, except the Europeans are knuckle draggers. Because, by the way, that 400,000 tons that went to Russia, that was supposed to go to Europe. Well, the non-Russian Europe, to the EU. So
is Russia not selling diesel to Europe then?
Russia's not selling diesel to anybody. This is the other point. Russia, during the agricultural season, Russia doesn't sell diesel. It hasn't in about 5 or 6 years, to make sure diesel prices stay low for the agriculture sector. Now, Russia's an agricultural powerhouse. It feeds about a third of the world. So, but the seasons vary. So in the south, they started the planting season in mid-March. In the far north, or the northern Siberian plain, you get the season sowing season is in May. They have a very intense short season because the sun's always up. But in the south, you get 2-3 harvests. So you've got sowing, harvesting, harvesting. And in this case, you need a lot of diesel. So Russia has stopped selling diesel. Normally, Russia starts selling diesel again around October, and then freezes again in beginning of May.
But you said this only happened it's only been in the last 5 years since the war started that they stopped exporting diesel. So there must be some shortage in the system somewhere that prevented them from wanting to sell it after the war started.
No, they started right before the war started. Russia started controlling exports back after 2011. So in 2011, Russia was running out of oil. Russia in 2011 was running out of fuel. And the reason they're running out of fuel is because Europe was running out of fuel. Well, the European Union. And big Russian oil majors, they decided they could make a lot more money selling that gasoline and diesel to the Europeans in the EU rather than selling on the domestic market. So quite literally, I remember these, I'd moved back in 2010, 2011, you had huge lines to get gasoline. And the government stepped in and said, whoa, we're not playing this game. First the home market, and then what's left you can go sell to somebody else. Because you're not going to crash our own economy just so you can make super profits in the European Union. So after that, that's when they started phasing in on and off stops on exports. And some of these export stops, like on gasoline, they'll pop in at different times of year if there's not enough gasoline. So that's it. No exports until the issues subside. Diesel is a pretty standard seasonal issue now because the key is to keep it cheap for the agricultural market. And if you're exporting, the price at home is going to go up. I mean, it's the market.
On the topic of the market, is the Wildberries attacks, and I'm sorry to jump around so quickly, but I know we're really pressed for time. Are the Wildberries attacks, is that having an effect on that company? I mean, we've seen countless of these facilities. Is that not going to affect their bottom line? And could that have some ramifications for the broader Russian economy?
A, yes, of course, it affects her bottom line. B, Tatiana Kim has been pretty generous because she doesn't have, by her contract, it's force majeure, but she's paid back all these businesses that sell through Wildberries. Wildberries and Ozone, they work the same as Amazon works. They have their own products that they sell, and they allow other people to sell and store their products at their warehouses. Now, what they've done is, Amazon, Ozone and Wildberries were there long before their big centralized warehouses were there. So they've gone back to a decentralized warehouse model. They just started using their old warehouses. They're small, scattered warehouses. I mean, the damage is there, obviously. I'm pretty sure it's all insured. I'd be shocked if it wasn't insured. But again, whether insurance pays out or not, it's an act of war. That's going to be a questionable issue. But they've decentralized. There's Wildberry trucks all over the place. Some things take an extra day or two or three, but to say that's going to break, first of all, that's not going to break Russia. That kind of issues, they will never break Russia. I mean, if you look what the Russian people have gone through since, let's just say 1905. And on, it's just been one disaster after another, and Russia keeps coming out stronger than before. I think most any other people would have probably been destroyed by now. So to say that you can't get your sea urchin slime face cream in one day and you may have to wait a week, I don't think that's going to
make for some very angry wives, man. That could cause civil uprising.
Well, here's the point that the West doesn't seem to get. Each one of these types of attacks, all of these terrorist attacks that they commit, I mean, on average, you're having between 10 and 30 Russian civilians murdered every single day. Enlistment is through the roof because the typical Russian response is, I'm going to go kill some Ukrainians and NATO people for that. I'm going to kill their soldiers on the battlefield. That's the typical Russian response. Any terrorist attack and the recruitment skyrockets. The criticism, the number one criticism from the people of Putin is, why are we not bombing them harder? Why are we not striking Europe? Why is Europe not burning?
And so why isn't Putin honoring that sentiment and being more aggressive then? That's really the question, right? Because a lot of this criticism of Putin isn't from, well, obviously the NATO camp has their criticisms, but a lot of the criticism from within, like you're saying, is not you suck. It's more like, hey, why aren't you doing more when we know you could do more, or we think you could do more?
One, just to be honest, first of all, understand this. Everybody is screaming Putin's the next Hitler and all that. Putin is a constitutionalist. He's a lawyer, and he is if I had to qualify him, I would qualify him as a conservative liberal, pro-European. So he's been trying to find a way to negotiate with these people. Now, a lot of people around him nowadays, not just the military, but Medvedev, Prigozhin, a lot of Lavrov, they want the Europeans to bleed. They're in the hard camp, and Putin is under massive pressure to go that way, and he has started to go that way. They stepped back from escalating because of Trump, and give them an attempt to negotiate. Well, that didn't work out, and that's become obvious. It didn't work out. It's lost a year in this effort.
Yeah. I
You
figured
know,
that
the
would
whole
happen.
Russian point when it came in. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Me too. I wasn't very popular on a lot of Russian television because I kept criticizing Trump. Yeah, this is pointless what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the order was don't criticize Trump. I kept criticizing Trump. So that was, the the whole point of the initial conflict was to bring Ukraine to the negotiation table, sign a neutrality pact with Ukraine, and end the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Minsk one, Minsk two, yeah, Istanbul. And the point is yeah, Russia got pulled around by the nose, and there's no trust for the Europeans. There's no trust for the West. I mean, Orban had a lot of trust, but Orban's been removed. Fisco and Babic, they've got trust, but they're minor players in the whole thing. So at this point, there's nobody to talk to, and it's finally settled in that the only way this is going to get done is on the battlefield.
I know you got a hard stop right away, or you have some
Yeah,
flexibility.
I've got Larry. I need to send them. As a matter of fact, I need to send them the
The link.
invite.
Okay. Well, how about we are you okay to come back on the channel and have a more in-depth conversation? Because there's so many things that we didn't really get to. Like, could probably talk about this stuff for hours. I wanted to do a little NAFO panic audit segment where I ask you to respond and possibly repudiate a lot of the claims that are being made by NAFO about panic in Russia and panic buying and gas prices and Putin mobilizing and blocking the border and stuff like that. How about we save that for next time?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We'll do it next week if you got some time toward the end of the week.
Yeah, let's do it. And you, yeah, let's tell Larry I said hi. And
I
guys,
will.
if you want to subscribe to Stanislav,